So hello everybody, I'm Mango Thunderslice, and this is my esteemed debate opponent today, Joe Stewart. We met each other in real life and we started having a political conversation, and lo and behold, we disagree on a lot of things, but we still enjoy each other's company. And the conversation kind of ran out the clock in the context that we started it, and we decided, you know what, I think we should do a debate. And Joe kind of challenged me to a debate. Basically, what we're going to be talking today or shooting to talk about is the presidency of Donald Trump, socialism versus capitalism, and global warming. And hopefully, we'll be able to hit all those topics. If this goes well, maybe we'll make kind of a running series out of it, but we'll see. Let us know in the comments below what you guys think, who represented their position more coherently. So on that note, basically, I'll let my esteemed colleague introduce himself and kind of just brief the class on where he's coming from, what position he'll be defending today. So, hello, Joe. Welcome.
Hey, Mr. Thunderslice, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. How's it going?
Great, great. Thank you for having me. It's definitely a pleasure to be here. So, those topics actually sound pretty good. I believe on our last conversation, although we kept it very short, we had a decent back and forth that we had going on. I'd like to consider myself not an expert at all on these topics at all, but I take some time out of my life to sort of have my own opinion on these matters. And there you are talking about it. And I said, you know what, I'm going to jump into this conversation, and now here we go.
Right on. So would you describe yourself as a socialist, or are you basically just kind of a liberal defending the socialist position?
Well, I don't know if I would describe myself as a socialist or a liberal. I'm definitely a centrist, and I strongly believe that if you are a true patriot, you must be a centrist. You cannot pick one side or the other. Number one, and I think history has proven over and over, any absolute one side has been detrimental, whether it's been to the right or it's been to the left. So this is why I find myself, playing the tug of war between both sides of the political party or both sides of the arena. So that's, and as for socialism, I'm not an economist, I should say. Just a few studies that I've done back and forth, and nothing really extraordinary or anything like that. It seems like socialism ends up working out a lot better for the people as a whole, instead of a certain class of people that tend to excel faster than others.
Okay, fair enough. And just to summarize to everybody, I am a libertarian conservative. I used to be an anarcho-capitalist, which some people consider to be the farthest end of the right-wing spectrum. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. Over the last couple of years since the Trump presidency, I've moved more to just a conservative. I'm not trying to abolish the government. I do agree that there should be rules in society. They should just make sense, is my position. And in contravention to other right-wing philosophies in Europe and whatnot, I think that the American system of capitalism and decentralized government of the federal system, of the states and local governments having the primary source of power, that's the specific system that I'm defending. Not necessarily some rarefied, notion of capitalism in an extreme sense. I think that the way that America was set up is actually probably the best system that could have been. I think that now with the state of technology, the potential exists to maybe create new systems that go even farther and bringing people the exact type of governance that they're looking for. But so that's where I'm interested in entertaining the idea of socialism, kind of in a new sense. We'll get into that. But yeah, basically I am defending entrepreneurship and capitalism in the American sense. I think I see socialism as mutually exclusive with that system. Right now we're kind of in a mixed economy where we have, state ownership of certain enterprises, we have heavy regulation, but we also still have private ownership of production and allocation of resources. But basically, so that's, I think, now that we've kind of established our positions, I think one of a useful thing we can do is kind of give our definitions of socialism and capitalism. I think that usually, in my experience with debates, when we find out where our definitions differ, that usually will define the structure of the entire argument and the disagreements. So basically, I'll let you start what your kind of definition of socialism is. I have the dictionary definitions here just as a reference, but I'll give my kind of personal definition, afterward, and we'll see how those line up.
Sure. Well, I don't know if we could technically use the dictionary definition of either socialism or capitalism or communism, because we do understand that the intent, either whether it's socialist or capitalist, it's going to fail. I mean, capitalism implodes at its at its full operational force. If it was specifically capitalism, and you use the definition for what it is, it will not sustain, it will implode, and I think we do understand that, and I do believe this is why we put sort of guards against that. And I would say the same thing with socialism. If you simply go based off of what socialism means in its definitional form, it will more than likely fail. And this is why we have to look at economic systems moldable. For example, the United States is not a full capitalist country. The reason why it's been able to be so successful is that it has a lot of socialist aspects to it, and these socialist aspects are able to keep. Well, whether you consider it a socialist aspect or a molded version of the capitalism, however you want to consider it, it is not a full-blown capitalism. I think we tried a full-blown capitalism, and what did we have? The Great Depression, several booms and busts and things like that, and we've been able to sort of get the system to settle as much as possible throughout these trials and errors in the last 70, 80 years or so. So the way I see it is, at first I don't believe that. I believe we have an identity crisis in this country, that we believe we're capitalist. I think we lean towards more socialism than we like to admit. And anytime we have an identity crisis, this is when we start sort of representing one thing but acting as another thing, and this is why it keeps the people confused. Now, I don't know if this is done by design or anything like that. A lot of times I feel like whenever the population is confused, I always feel like it's done by design. I come from a communist country, previously a communist country that technically failed, which was the Soviet Union. So I definitely don't believe in the communist way of an economic system. Although I don't know if its failures were from communism or from everything, and everybody works for the government, and then you got the government class that distributes wealth all the way down. I think that's a extreme misconception of socialism. So socialism, the way I see it, needs to be intended to work is, yes, the government needs to control infrastructure, healthcare, prison systems, and education systems. I do believe these things should not be operated on a for-profit basis. It should not be, other private companies should be allowed to tap into if they so choose to. But main course of action, whether it's healthcare, infrastructure, military, education, all of these things should be controlled by, governed by the government, is a better way to put it. As for the rest of the country, and also natural resources, these belong to the people. The natural resources, they should belong to a certain group, certain family that have gained some kind of a wealth and have been able to piece out a certain plot of the property and say, this is mine and I'm going to capitalize off of this. I do believe natural resources belong to the people. As for the rest of the country, whether it's businesses, property, private property, all of these things should be privately held and privately operated and taxed so that it is capable of supporting the other things that I mentioned that is supported by the government. And that's simply, in the most simplest term, my view of this matter.
Okay, so you're not advocating for full socialism. You see a mixed economy. You're kind of arguing for democratic socialism, then, kind of aware of. Is that correct?
You absolutely have to. You're absolutely correct. I don't think you could have a full socialism, full communism, or full capitalism. It could be molded. What are your thoughts on these matters?
Well, I'll give my definition, and then I'll get to some of these. Basically, my definition of socialism, I think so. You know, the dictionary definition of socialism. You know, well, just for the sake of the aspect. So, one, any of various economic and political theories advocating collective or governmental ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution of goods. Two, a system of society or group living in which there is no private property, so that's not what you're advocating. B, to be a system or condition of society. What's that?
So I do believe that's communism. That definition fits very well with communism, but I don't see that fitting. But although I could be wrong, of course, it's the definition you're reading it.
Well, and that's the third definition, basically. So after to be a system or condition of society in which the means of production are owned and controlled by the state. Number three is a stage of society in Marxist theory, transitional between capitalism and communism and distinguished by unequal distribution of goods and pay according to work done. So kind of in the conventional Marxist theory, socialism is it's designed to be a halfway step to communism. Right, it's kind of it's a way of implementing government control over private industries in a capitalist system, and basically over time, basically increasing the government's role in the economy until you get to communism. Essentially, that's how it works in theory. Of course, the democratic socialists aren't necessarily arguing for that. You know, I would say that the people arguing for socialism often, you know, there doesn't ever seem to be a stopping point in a lot of leftist mind. They just keep for them communism is the end goal, you know. But you know, there's the business Democrats and the business liberals who kind of, you know, they understand a little bit more about the market economy than, say, basically, you know, just some, you know, communist working minimum wage, you know, living in their mom's basement type thing. Not to be disparaging, but there's a lot of people in hard economic times, and the reason that communism and socialism are on the resurgence is because people see it as a way of reinstituting fairness and justice in a system that they think has wronged them. And I think that that's a legitimate response. You know, again, I was a socialist and a communist back in high school before I had really, you know, experienced any hard times at all. But it was just kind of a youth thing. I remember reading the Communist Manifesto back then, and it was part of a rebellious phase. I saw, you know, the wars were going on in Iraq, and I saw that as a manifestation of this society, and I saw capitalism as part and parcel of that system, you know, and this is one of the more legitimate aspects of points in my mind that the socialists and the leftists make is basically the imperial form of capitalism is absolutely a parasitic system, and I have no support for that. You know, I believe that that's a corruption of capitalism and a corruption of the American system. I don't think the people want to go to war. You know, in a market economy, war making would be very different than what we have now with the military-industrial complex and Boeing and Raytheon just getting hundreds of billions of free dollars every year from the government just buying a whole bunch of excess military hardware, so that just to let China and Russia know that they'll never catch up. And yet at the same time, Russia and China are catching up by spending money, not just more and more and more, but spending it on certain weapons classes. So, it's not necessarily entirely clear, especially when comparing against a country like China, which is nominally communist, but incorporates a lot of capitalist, market aspects. Are we necessarily distributing, goods as well as the Chinese? I would say yes, but there's an argument to be made because obviously they've had a great rise out of poverty for their country. But I would again say that's because of capitalism, not because of socialism, right? We had during the Cultural Revolution in Mao's China. I mean, we're talking about millions and millions dead, right? So I won't hammer the 100 million dead in the 20th century too hard, because that is straight up communism, that is straight up Marxism. Again, I think it's very dangerous when we start courting leftist ideologies in the public realm, because though you might believe in a centrist position, the people, the millions of other Americans who want communism, they don't see that nuance. They're going to keep on voting to destroy the patriarchy and destroy capitalism, until it's actually destroyed. But in this debate, I'm going to recognize your argument as it stands and not have a straw man, because democratic socialism is it's a legitimate phenomenon. It's basically, and you've kind of said that you see the New Deal as a form of socialism, and government control of industries like healthcare and prisons, right? That's an example of socialism. I think to a degree that's correct. I think that there's a distinction to be made between regulation of industries versus socialism. I think that things like the Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, I think those are legitimate incarnations of socialism. But what I wouldn't consider socialism is like the EPA regulating emissions of toxic chemicals. I think that the regulation of businesses, of private businesses, is a function of a capitalist state, and not necessarily, there's some people who say everything the government does equals socialism. I think that's that's not really true. That's a lacks nuance, right? But controlling industries like Social Security would be basically federal kind of control over a national pension system, right? Otherwise, there are private institutions to satisfy those ends, and basically, to address some of the points that you brought up, basically that capitalism created the Great Depression, for example, and that capitalism has created more inequality and more hard times for people. I would say that the closest that we have come to a capitalist society in this country was in the late 19th century, between the end of the Civil War during the Reconstruction period and basically the early 20th century when the Federal Reserve was instituted in 1913. For a long part of that, we were on the gold standard, so we had sound money. Our money was not there were banknotes, but primarily the banknotes were competing against one another, so there was no federal system to bail out everybody. It was a little chaotic, yeah, but the banks had an interest of not to loan out too much money. There was gold as a failsafe. There was a currency that everybody was using. And during that time, we built the railroads. We expanded this country from coast to coast. Basically, we grew the backbone of the economy that exists today. That's still, it's rusting and breaking down, but it's still holding this country together. The wealth that was created during that time, we're still benefiting from that. And basically over the 20th century, we've seen basically a little crises and little panics turn into huge panics and huge crises, like the Great Depression. It was a result of the Federal Reserve and the money printing. They blew up the money supply in the roaring 20s, and the stock market's flying. And then what happens when you print a bunch of fake money to buy a bunch of assets that you wouldn't otherwise afford? It collapses. The bubble pops, and then they put salt in the wound and they took money out of the money supply. So basically the banks artificially created the boom, and then when the crash came, they pulled all the money out, so it just really, and like nobody had anything. So it's hard for me to say that that's a result of capitalism when, basically, and this was part of our conversation before, the fifth plank of the Communist Manifesto is the institution of a central bank for the central control of the issuance of credit. So the Federal Reserve in our country is an example of communist theory in action. And for me, things that are the result of the Federal Reserve, I don't think are legitimately attributable to capitalism. I think that's centralized control. That's one of the socialist aspects of this country, is the Federal Reserve. But before that time, we had a gold standard, and we built the railroads, and we made this country what it is. And we've been kind of riding on that momentum for 100 years, and now we see things breaking down, and we're trillions of dollars in debt. And we've been operating on unsound economic policies, and I think those unsound policies are the socialism that you're advocating for. Is basically the government getting involved and creating misincentives, disincentives, and basically screwing with the economy. And that's how we've got to where we are now, where basically we're overpaying for stuff that is lower quality. And basically I think that honestly what Trump has done is a legitimate serious move in correcting a lot of those deficiencies, and especially things that aren't even necessarily socialism versus capitalism, just trade policies, like what he's doing with China. I think is a very nuanced thing that not many people understand, but I think it's something that needed to be done. And he's been saying that since the 80s. Love him or hate him, he's been very consistent on the point of trade and China and, the American people getting the best deal out of the global economy and not just being the piggy bank for everyone. But yeah, sorry, I kind of rambled there.
No, you're good. So first, I see things a little bit differently than you do, especially if you think, I'm going to go back a few minutes and then I'll start moving forward, especially if you think socialism leads to communism. I think that's incorrect. I think the intent and the way I interpret is what I believe Marx interpreted as well, and I could be completely wrong about that, but the way I interpret is that communism eventually leads to socialism, and capitalism eventually leads to socialism. It's all roads do ultimately lead to socialism, and I know you spoke about the hyper expansion of this country. Theoretically, I like business and everything else. I look at things in a format of a business and everything like that. Once a business is under a hyper growth situation, you'll see a lot of exciting things happening, a lot of exciting times without necessarily, I guess they're called hyper scaling or blitz scaling, however you want to say it. You don't necessarily look at the outcome or the collateral damage or anything. You're hyper growing. But once you settle, then sort of bureaucracy kicks in. That's just like in any other business. You look at, Facebook, Google, and all of these things. They started off with this hyper growth, extreme excitement. Intent was good. Everything's great. Ultimately, they have to create a corporation, and they need to self-regulate themselves because they can't consistently hyper growth the way that the collateral damage is too much. And that's the same way with this country. We were in a hyper growth situation. We were able to do it because we had a lot of land to conquer, a lot of new, a lot of new expansions to be able to make in this country. As for the gold system, in my opinion, it's a decent system at the very most. I don't think a gold system is sustainable. And as this is going to sound extremely not popular, especially with you, but I do understand the idea of fiat money. I do understand the necessity of it, and I do understand that if you want to sustain some kind of a monetary system, it has to be built on confidence. It's not built on any physical item. Anytime you build any foundation, economic foundation on a physical item, there's bound to, if there's less of it or more of it, certain groups will end up with a lot more versus another group will not. It is better to be built on a sort of a confidence-based system. If, for a lack of a better word, fiat money, that's exactly what it is. It doesn't theoretically exist. It is created, and it is controlled, and it is distributed to the confidence of the country. How the business is, what the amount of population there is out there, and this is where the interest rates kick in. They start controlling that situation, and it could easily go sideways. All it takes is one wrong group to go in there with extreme power. But you could say that about anything, whether it's a gold system or a silver system or however you want to put the system. Anytime there's bad players, things are just going to go bad. But if you want to be sustainable, if you want to enjoy the hyper growth, and also be able to settle in a good format, you do need a confidence-based system, which is theoretically a fiat-based money system. So I'm totally okay with that, as long as it's controlled properly. That's my opinion on that matter. As for China, I think China should be a great example of how communism ultimately leads towards socialism. And China starts off as a communist country. Now, whether I could attest to the 100 million people or so, such and such, dying in that era or going through the hardship or whatever, I don't know if I could attest that 100% to communism or somewhat of a communism, but I could see it having somewhat of a play to it. But that's to show, we had extreme capitalism here, which included slavery. They had extreme communism over there, which, put a lot of people in a lot of bad situation. Yes, during that era, quite a few people died, and it's definitely unfortunate. I don't know if I could attest that completely to communism. I think it had a lot to do with their government system, at the same time acquiring power. There was a lot more to it than just its communism. But ultimately, to go back to my point, as you can see, it is leaning towards socialism, and once it starts leaning towards socialism, you'll notice that it becomes an economic powerhouse. Our country became an economic powerhouse as well as soon as it started leaning towards socialism. And ultimately, I think we have to give in to this matter, that we don't need to do a hyper growth anymore. We've reached our limit of growth. Every single corner of this country has been sort of controlled, and it's being developed. Now it needs to be governed, and this is where socialism comes in a sense where having healthcare system in the hands of privateers, I just think that's insane. Having prison systems in the hands of privateers, it's crazy. What's it called? Education, I could see that going both ways. I think our education system, which we do have it both ways right now. We have the public system, which is funded by the government, and then we have the private system. I do believe the public system is extremely improperly managed. I don't think the funding is going to in the proper direction, and I think this is where me and you will agree. I think the left has gone a little far too left, and it's starting to spill into the school systems. This is where I like to pull the left back to center a little bit as much as possible. It's definitely a losing formula when you go towards that direction in this absolute sense of the form.
For sure, I definitely applaud those efforts wherever made. It's funny to watch Nancy Pelosi try and do the same when the rest of her party's like, no, we want communism now. But
I don't think
I
the
think
party wants communism.
well,
It's
after the debate, when you have the entire stage raise their hand when they say, "How many of you, how many of your health plans would give basically free health insurance to illegal immigrants?" and the entire stage raises their hand, that's that's not even just socialism. That's socialism way beyond what the original socialists and immigration activists in this country ever advocated for. For
so
very,
so
uh,
I I'm
sorry, go
sorry to
ahead.
cut you off, but I don't think that's neither socialism or communism. That's a whole new something that we have to figure out what to do with. Do we have illegal immigrants in this country? Absolutely. What do we do about it? So, you have to have an answer for that. For now, without an answer, you must take care of their health care. But if you do have an answer for it, I'd like to hear it.
Well, I mean, I agree with most of the measures taken by Mr. Trump. I think that structurally you have to solve the issue, right? Me allowing people into my home because I want to give them aid and help, that's totally fine. I understand that moral imperative, but that's a far cry from leaving my door open and basically leaving like a trail of snacks on the way in and like, a pile of money and a pile of food on the inside. That's the equivalent of what we'd be doing if we go with open borders and massive state welfare. You're creating incentive for everyone to come here. Right, we're a wealthy country because of our market economy and all of the private actors creating wealth in this country. We do have the ability to use some of that excess production, for to distribute to achieve the better social aims, and that's what I think the legitimate function of the left is, and the legitimate arguments behind socialism are those moral arguments. But it sorry, I kind of forgot my
No. Well, I'd like to go back to my question.
yeah.
What do we do with the current people that are here at the moment? Do we give them health care? Do we not? Can they afford it? Can they not? Again, I don't think this is a socialist, communist, or capitalist question. I think this sort of leans into the moral argument, and then it does sort of lean into something needs to be done. These are humans after all.
For sure, and basically, it's. I think there's legitimate reasons to process the asylum applications and get people in who need the help. But there's also this was a point that one of the Democratic candidates tried to bring up, and they got lambasted for it. But that illegal immigration is different than asylum applications, right? People fleeing their country is different from people just like kind of coming in illegally for economic reasons, or maybe they're working with the drug cartels or whatnot.
Right.
But we can have aspects of the welfare state. We can have people coming into this country, but it's the uncontrolled mass illegal migration that we can't have, because it's very simple mathematics. And basically, I can't remember his name right now. Down in Sacramento, right in front of the courthouse, there's the whole park. Who's it dedicated to?
Cesar Chavez?
Cesar Chavez, that's the name I'm trying to
Yeah,
think
yeah.
of. He was against illegal immigration. He was a socialist. He was for the welfare state. He was an immigrant rights activist. But he understood the basic mathematics that if you're going to give your citizens welfare and social services, right, that's from, and it's not an infinite pile of money that's coming from. You say, all right, let's share some of the extra slices of the pie, here. But what happens if we let anybody come, and eat the pie, right? There's not going to be any pie left for anybody, especially the citizens. Right, so
So,
there's the moral imperative to help people, but I think I'm never going to give the food to somebody in the street, even if they're destitute, if I don't have food enough to feed my own daughter and
absolutely.
wife. I've got to have a priority scale here, and I think that's what we do when we control immigration. We don't have to reduce it to zero, in my opinion. There's people who would say, yes, we do. I don't necessarily agree. I think we should have a merit-based immigration system which prioritizes things like asylum. It also prioritizes things like what are they bringing in terms of skills, basically other things. But there's at the same time when we don't control it, there's human trafficking, there's drug trafficking, every single woman and child gets basically sexually assaulted and raped along the way. It's not compassionate to be incentivizing illegal migration.
No,
We
you're
can bring
absolutely
people
right.
in without incentivizing that system. That's the domain of the cartel and the human traffickers. That's not helping anybody. That's all bad, right? I mean,
Yeah, I do have to agree with you there. And so this is one of my sort of, I guess, the points that I hate to admit when I do agree with Trump. For the longest time, I would say I don't want a fucking wall, and just because it was Trump that was proposing it. But theoretically, it makes sense, right?
In 2016, I didn't give a shit about the wall. I did not care at all. This was not my issue. We were planning on immigrating out of the United States. We wanted to go to South America, so I was not at all concerned with a wall. But I will say that over the last 2 years, he's kind of convinced me. And I've kind of thinking about it myself. I mean, it's just the country is our collective house, right? We should have walls around our house. That's just, basic common logic. But for some reason, we have people that are so anti-Trump, they're even willing to say walls don't work.
Well, I used to be one of those people.
Well, okay, but at the same time, when you got Maxine Waters and Nancy Pelosi and all these basically politicians living in their big gated mansions, right? It's like you're gonna tell me that walls don't work? I mean, yes, can people get over walls? Yes, but does that mean that walls don't work? Like, as in they don't deter, people from coming in? The walls work, okay? They may not be 100% effective, but they are a solid deterrent. That's why they've been used since the dawn of time of human civilization.
Yeah, no, we definitely, I don't believe in the fact of stopping immigration. I don't believe in the fact of, not allowing people to come in here for economic opportunity. Is that the baby? So I don't believe in the fact that we should stop people from coming in for economic opportunity. That's what this country was created by those people who wanted a better life for themselves. That is the intent of this country. You should be able to come to this country to create a better life for yourself. At the same time, to create a better country with everybody else. I don't think. Protecting ourselves, putting borders in place, these things are important, although I don't think it should be the ultimate goal. I am a zero border advocate across the world, but I don't think we could reach there overnight. I think societies and humans need to evolve to that nature first.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and once we evolve, and this could take 100 years. This could take several hundred years. So evolution doesn't happen. As much as I'd like to believe my leftist friends over here, evolution just it just doesn't happen overnight. And and at the end of the day, look, a lot of things are done under good intent, but sometimes good intent gets you in trouble. And there's a famous saying, "Oh, hell's road is paved with good intentions." I get that. If I said that incorrectly, something like that.
For sure, no, and I think that even when we're a spacefaring species and we're colonizing Mars and the moons of Jupiter and whatnot, I think that we'll still have delineated countries and states and counties and townships. I think that basically, again, the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But also at the same time, their tastes may not be the same, right?
Yeah.
That we are not a uniform species. We are different people. We have different histories. Basically, I don't know if basically Native Americans should be drinking as much as the Irish. I think there's legitimate reasons to keep the cultures separate, just based on biology.
You're absolutely right, but I do believe there will be a time that will come where, as humans, we will evolve to live as one nation. And that's. I don't think that's anywhere in the near future. I really don't. But we should always be striving towards that direction.
Well,
And also one more thing I want to say. I know a utopian society, utopia, or the term utopian society has been termed as a negative or a bad thing, or because of maybe George Orwell of 1984 and things like that. I get that, but we should never strive. We should never not stop striving to be a utopian society. We should always try to perfect ourselves, to have this, to reach these levels of utopia where everything seems to be working the way it's supposed to be working. Again, not in the near future. Maybe even 1,000 years, but we should strive towards that direction.
I definitely understand and agree with that point, and that's kind of why I'm still an anarcho-capitalist in principle. I'm just not an anarcho-capitalist in practice. Because for that reason, people, in my view, people are not ready to have a totally free society. People are, most of the species is.
What anarcho-capitalist means, or
anarcho-capitalism is basically the theory that the government structure, the federal centralized government structure, can be eliminated, and the services that it is performing, the beneficial services, eliminating the war-making capacity, but basically that the private entities and private law societies can provide the services currently provided by government. It's essentially both eliminating the government and replacing it with free market structures, in short.
So, Joe Rogan actually has a point of view which I think it's sometimes funny and sometimes true. Like, why do we still need one person, the president or the king or such and such, to rule over everybody? Why is that even still a thing? We should have evolved away from that a while ago, but we still have that one head of state or head of something. And I kind of get it. Why do we need that one? Why not section it off? And I guess that's where you kind of lean into a little bit of socialism, sort of like the people governing themselves type of situation, and certain things are operated by the people, and not all things, and certain things need to be, of course, like I said, privatized. And you need to be able to enjoy your life. You need to be able to, if you're smarter than one person, you should be able to make more than the other person. But that doesn't mean you should be able to get a better healthcare or education than that person who has achieved certain goals.
For sure. Well, I think that if you can buy a better healthcare package, you're entitled to purchase it, But I definitely agree that if we can provide a public option that is, for me, I think the states should provide it. I don't think the federal government should be involved. I'd be much easier with a localized system. You at least, the bigger the program gets, the less accountable it is. Just like you're saying,
right.
The more you take that authority structure higher and higher and higher, like there's a difference between when I know where the governor lives or the mayor lives, I can drive by their house, versus Washington D.C. is 3,000 miles away. I don't even know these people.
Right. Yeah.
But
and that's to go back to, why should there be that one person in charge?
Yeah, and I agree, and especially from the anarchist perspective, I definitely agree that that's not always needed. I definitely agree in the principle of leadership, because, as we would agree, humans are not all identical, and, some people, basically just are endowed with more, whether we will call it privilege or natural biological creativity or energetic force, or just the cards were laid out and they got a royal flush. Some people are basically innovators and they create new patterns, and then there's other people who follow in those patterns, and others who follow them, and then there's others who don't, they're just kind of along for the ride. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's always going to be that way. Because as long as we are not a uniform species, there will always be those unequal distribution of resources, because people are putting different inputs into the system. They get different outputs back. What we would both agree is we should do what we can within the confine of ethics to basically help, maybe make a, I guess, the safety net, and I think that, again, so that people, even in their hardest times, aren't, suffering to the point of like an animal in the street, right? That we should have that human decency and provide those services if we can. I would agree on providing them. I would just advocate for providing them through private structures. I think that, charity is better than taxes being taken from people to put into a government program to forcibly give to another person. And before the welfare state, those functions were taken up by the church, right? The people, they could go to the church, and I don't think that, there's other ways to provide it outside of the state and outside of the church. It's all just essentially services, and if people agree that those services should be provided and there's capital stock enough to provide them, it's just about making those decisions. And again, the function of government and what it's good for on a local scale is allowing people the mechanism to decide those things.
The only part that I will disagree with you on that is, every time you privatize a charity or something like that, you add the profit motive in there, and then it tends to dilute the intent. And I'll give you an example. We have a great charity system in this country, except 90% or so goes into the pockets of the operators. 7% by law, I believe 7% is the number by law that is required for them to actually distribute the charity across the board. And that's become the case over and over. They get to save on taxes. It's tax-free money. This is how most of these, charity funds that these people create, it becomes a tax haven, actually, in a lack of a better word.
Yeah, and then there's the Clinton Foundation, which goes full on into selling off state assets to Russia and other foreign entities for hundreds of millions in donation to their foundation. They're on a whole other level, right there.
You have the same thing with the Trump Foundation.
I don't know if it's the same level. I mean, the way that the structure is set up, the system does invite abuse, right? Every single millionaire and billionaire has their own non-profit foundation to basically, for tax reasons, to minimize liabilities and whatnot. I don't even think that in and of itself isn't illegitimate, but what you were saying is the money going to the administrative and not to the actual, the purpose of the charity. I think that's really bad, and again, it's a product of the perverse incentives that are set up in this kind of combined private-public, setup. But
I have a good friend. He's coined the term. I am a frugal philanthropist.
Yeah, and again, I'm not necessarily, as far returning to the debate, I'm not exactly saying that eliminate all welfare and charities will figure it out. I think that again, there's new, in the current context, there's new ways to distribute resources and provide governance without relying on the existing methods. Are you familiar with the 5-Star movement in Italy?
I'm not.
This is literally, it's a political movement, and the head of it was started by a comedian, an Italian comedian named Beppe Grillo. He's hilarious. I've watched some of the stuff with English subtitles, and he's just hilarious. But basically, it's not necessarily right or left. It's kind of I'll let you look into it after. But one of the things that really caught my interest was that they're about direct democracy, and basically using the internet and technology to basically just kind of replace the existing governance structures and bring it exactly to the people, right? Things that should be in the hands of the people, should be decided by the people. We can do that. It's just about reorganizing, how we can have elections on the blockchain, right? We can,
And I think the blockchain theory has that hidden intent in there, which, in my opinion, later on will be more relevant than it is today.
Here's how I want to see it, and I've said this for years and years before blockchain even existed, was I would like to have, when I pay taxes, I'd like to have a checklist and say, okay, this is what I want my money going toward. Basically, I want to choose what my public contributions go to. And
Hmm.
I imagine that if you could say, okay, the people who want to fund the military can fund the military. The people who want to just build schools can just build schools, right? I feel like that makes sense. But I feel like that's achievable. And I feel like, in fulfilling that, we would have a lot of results that people might call socialism. But again, it could all be done through a technically private structure. It could be public, but it's just a different conversation. And again, I agree with providing those services where we can, but I don't agree with unethically, using the taxation power of the state to basically just redistribute money, because people are envious of rich people. And that's what I see a lot of the
Yeah,
left is
so
people acting out of
I
envy.
never, yeah, I never understood that part about being envious of other people, and this is why money should be distributed. For example, if I have $1 million and you don't, how do I, if you ask some of these extreme left wing wannabe socialists or communists, they'll say, well, what you would do is you would take $500,000 and give it to the other person, and you guys are even. Well, that's incorrect, because he's going to run out of that $500,000 and then he's going to come back to the well again. The trick is to educate this person, and this is where we go into the education. A piece of my money should be taken out to the educational system, and this person should be educated on how to achieve these means and goals. And now there are the unfortunate, who are either medically not capable, or whatever the reason, one way or another. They should be taken care of, and they should be taken care of by the community as a whole. And I strongly believe that.
Basically, for me, just to summarize with Trump, if the only thing that he could do right now that I would stop supporting him would be to invade Iran or Venezuela. If he were to do that, I would basically probably throw my support behind Tulsi Gabbard, even though I disagree with her on a whole swath of different things. For me, one of the major issues is the war making and a foreign policy, because what people are talking about, immigration problems, blah blah blah. Whether it's in Europe or in the Americas, a lot of these problems are caused by the intervention of the CIA and the American military in a lot of these parts of the world. I'll fully acknowledge that. And again, I don't defend that imperial war making capacity as part of capitalism. I see it as totally foreign. I think that's a hijacking of the capitalist system. And
Yeah,
basically, but
I agree
otherwise,
100%.
Otherwise, I think Trump's done a fantastic job. You show how, basically actual strength in negotiating. Basically the North Korea situation, I feel like was a masterfully played situation. Basically he didn't come in with, oh, hands outstretched, what can we do for you? Basically he said, we're going to
Yeah.
effing destroy you if you don't. He came out basically in a position of strength, and it freaked people out. I for a second thought we were going to war in North Korea, but he's a negotiator. The art of the deal. He knows how to basically apply pressure and ask for 2 to 3 times what he wants, and then when he gets, that one, well, that's what he wanted originally. And especially
So,
in contravention to Obama, who was just basically completely, for lack of a better word, cucked, and basically just, had no strength, and just was, basically. I actually agreed with the Iran deal because I don't want to go to war with Iran. I think they should have the ability to have nuclear energy,
mhm.
but ultimately, I mean, controlling the border, lowering taxes, lowering regulations, a strong American culture and defense of American values. I think all of these things, Trump's doing a fantastic job. And again, as long as he stays the hell out of Venezuela and Iran, I mean, I'm totally cool with another, 5 years of this trajectory.
So, well, first, I think me and you, I think me and you will agree on Tulsi a lot. If I'm looking at all the clowns that are, debating in these couple of days, uh, Tulsi definitely stands out. I like her, but Going back to Trump, look, I don't think Trump is a good negotiator, number one. And this is where me and you are going to probably possibly throw some fists back and forth or something, because I'm going to be extremely harsh on Trump. Only because I've met several people. I've met the person, I'm not going to give any names, but I've met the person that used to be part of Deutsche Bank, an employee of Deutsche Bank while the bankruptcy things were going on. So he was able to enlighten me a little bit about that. And these are just simply, just by accident, but through other contacts and everything between business back and forth. I didn't intend to meet these people. It just happened that way. I met two of the people that were operating Taj Mahal for Trump, and the top level operators. They do what I do now, and this is why we were able to meet each other. They do check out, and it seems like anyone who's had any kind of interaction or any kind of, including his own authors, the author of the Art of the Deal. There is no positive information coming out about his personality, about his mentality, about his ability to be able to negotiate. Now, everyone does confirm one thing: Trump understands how to surround himself with people who do his bidding and who tend to understand how to get what Trump wants done without having Trump meddle into it. They try to keep Trump as far away as possible from operations. They almost want to make him think he's in charge. The people he surrounds himself, and I'm sure he pays them well. And I'm sure they make him a lot of money at the same time. But that does not mean he's smart. He's got smarts, street smarts. Definitely, I'll give him that. I have street smarts. And I smell street smarts a mile away. But smart, I don't think he's smart. I think he was able to surround himself with proper people. And I think his father taught him this situation. And had he started where I had started, there's no way he would be where I am at. And I'm not wealthy or anything like that, but I like to think of myself as successful. But let's just say he had the same starting point as I did. He didn't get the $2 million loan from his father. He didn't inherit his father's, I'm not sure, several $100 million empire, or let's just say $40 million, $50 million dollar empire. He would not be anywhere near where I'm at, much less where he's at right now. And this, I smell this a mile away, just simply because it's my backyard.
Fair enough, and that all of that may well be true. I don't have any personal, anecdotes to counter it, but I will say that there's some hypotheticals there. If a fish was a giraffe, it would be able to see a lot farther, but a fish isn't a giraffe, and we all live the lives we've lived. Basically, I think that it's indisputable that he is strategically intelligent. And I think that even if you doubt his own personal, intellect, Henry Ford was not a smart guy, but the same thing, he knew how to find the people who did know and surround himself with them. And to me, that's kind of the ultimate level of intelligence. There's people with 180 IQ that can't delegate, and they're functionally useless outside of their little specialty.
You are 100% correct on this. It is much better of a tactician and a talent to be able to surround yourself with smarter people than you being smart yourself. I believe most successful people have been able to surround themselves with a lot smarter people than themselves, and that's why they've been successful. But now you have to look at the surroundings. I mean, who do we got? We got Manafort, we have Cohen, we have all of these people that were dirty. There's no questions. I mean, Manafort was rigging elections for Putin. No questions about that.
Well, for Ukraine, basically, and he was actually doing work with the Podesta brothers, who were basically, John Podesta was the chairman of Hillary Clinton's
Yes.
campaign, right? The
Doesn't
Ukrainian
make
money
sense.
is, and
You're
Joe
absolutely
Biden, if he becomes the nominee, you're going to see some real shady
you-
stuff about
you're
Ukraine
absolutely
coming out.
right, but it doesn't exonerate Manafort. Just because he was involved, I believe the whole entire Hillary crew and everybody else was crooked. There's no questions about that. I mean, anybody who doesn't think so is absolutely naive. But anybody who doesn't think Trump's team is crooked is also naive.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I wanted to tap into, yes, Joe, but we got the lesser of two evils. That's what I keep hearing. Yes, Joe, we got the lesser of two evils. Where are we in society that we have to choose the lesser of two evils? When there was plenty of people. Man, my favorite person in the 2016 elections was John Kasich, a Republican, amazing human being. How did we skip people like that and ended up with two evils? That has to speak with society, how divided we are. We let these two people play us like pawns, and they did it very good of it. They kept us divided as much as possible, and Trump still divides us. I mean, on his last speech where he says, can you imagine if it was a Democrat in president or gets to be president, they'll take away this, they'll do this, they'll do that. What is he saying? He's basically saying all Democrats are bad and all of us are good. Maybe so, but this is not how you unite a country. A leader, if we choose to still have leaders, a leader needs to know how to unify a country. But he is the dividing sledgehammer that's still out there just chopping away, making sure the left and the right stay as divided as possible.
I would say the media is fulfilling that function far better than Trump could do in his wildest dreams. I think he's actually tried valiantly in the last 2 years or 2.5 years since he took office at trying to unify the country. I think that at every single turn his message has been twisted and warped by the media and people. It's just become this.
Well, he makes it too easy, but what it
he
is
plays
is
them. He knows how they'll react, and so he'll toss up, basically a tweet, and he knows how that's how he got elected, was he'll control the entire media cycle with something that is a bombastic comment, and basically...
Absolutely. And I don't know if that's his doing or some of the people that surround him, but I think it's his doing. But, standing up in front of 20,000 people and saying, can you imagine if it's a Democrat in power, they'll take this, they'll take that. That's not media. Hold on. That's not media dividing the people. That is Trump himself saying we are better than them.
But when you have the Democratic candidates literally are like competing to see who will take away guns fast enough and who will restrict and eliminate the First Amendment to protect us from hate speech fast enough, basically that's an accurate characterization of their positions. He's speaking the truth based on their own profession, which is they don't respect the First Amendment, they don't respect the Second Amendment, which to me, if you get rid of those two, there's not really a whole lot of American freedom left worth defending.
He's molded into his side, and that includes you, to think that is what the Democrats want to do. That's not what the Democrats want to do. Democrats don't want to take away the guns. Regardless of the fact we got 300 million guns out there, that's insanity. I don't even know why anybody thinks that's okay, but it's we definitely should not take away the guns. We should make it extremely hard to own a gun. And then we could get into this if there is another opportunity for us to talk, which I enjoyed myself very well, by the way, and I'd like to tap into that. But I don't think the Democrats want to do that. Now there are some bad players, but there are also some bad players on the other side, and I think there always will be bad players. Now here's my opinion of Barack Obama. I agree with you. He was weak. I agree. He should have been a little bit stronger, but his speeches, his words were always about unity and unifying, and never, it's always been that. Now, say one thing or another, I did not like his presidency because he was weak, and I'll tell you why he was weak. he hired the two most the two people that he should not have hired, which is John Kerry and Hillary Clinton. These are two people who wanted to be presidents, and they failed. So they undermined his goals and his operations, whether it was foreign, the Libyan thing. That was a Hillary Clinton thing. It had nothing to do with Barack Obama. But they undermined him so many times, and this speaks to his weakness, that he doesn't know how to surround himself with proper people. And this speaks to Trump's strength, that sometimes he does. Sometimes, most of the time, it's crooked people. Like, I like Pompeo. I think he's great. But some of the other people, they're very divisive people. But all this aside, Obama was the president that was going to be capable of unifying this country. I did believe that. I don't believe that anymore, but I could see he did try, probably far better than George Bush or or Trump.
Fair enough. Well, it looks like we're up at about the limit of our time, so I'll kind of give my kind of final word, and then you can give your final word, and maybe we'll do another one here next weekend or something. We can get into more of the individual things, gun control, global warming, and hash out exactly, because without resolving those, the question of, what the Democrats are proposing versus what Trump is proposing, we have to kind of get into those, but we'll save that for a new one. But basically, just to summarize, I would agree with what you just said, that basically, Obama and Trump, two imperfect humans. One basically knows how to surround himself with, people who know what he doesn't and create a winning team that can achieve success. And the other basically was only versed in saying things that sounded nice, but didn't have any ability to build a team, didn't have the strength or leadership to basically hold the team together. So he ended up getting railroaded by his own subordinates who, pursued their own personal aims at the expense of the country and at the expense of his presidency. I think that's actually a perfect distillation of people who succeed in the private sector, in business and capitalism, versus people who succeed in socialism. Obama, as a community organizer, he's like a perfect example of what socialism produces and promotes to the top, is the guy who can just say the rosiest, speeches and bring everybody together, but at the same time, beneath that rosy coat of paint, it's rotting and it's broken and it's not functional. Whereas with Trump, you might have some scratches on the paint, you might have some flames on it that are entirely ridiculous. It might look ridiculous on the outside, but on the inside, it's a well-run, well-oiled machine just humming along and producing wealth for people. And of course, there's millions and millions of people within there, basically that are also participating in it. I like to live in a machine that works. If we have to live in a machine at all, I'm not a machine, you're not a machine, but the economy in a certain sense is a machine, right? It's how we all interrelate to each other. And when we let that machine fix itself, which is us fixing it as individuals, and again, there's a role for the government to have a structure there. But I think that socialism, by definition, in all forms, is trying to use one person's perspective or a small group of people's perspective to go and try and control it and basically make it work for their ends and what they think to be the better outcome. And I think a lot of those outcomes, nominally, in terms of what they profess to want, their good intentions, are very good. I won't deny that their intentions, at least on the surface, sound very good. But behind it, good intentions, if they lead to hell, are not worth my time. And that's basically my final word on socialism. I'll let you kind of close it out. And I really enjoyed this. But yeah, go ahead.
I've actually, this is definitely fun. It's the first time I've ever done anything like this, and I absolutely had a blast. And I hope you have me back again. But to go back to the state of affairs currently, this is what I believe. Trump was elected because of the Russians. He would not have been able to. Now, whether there was collusion or not, that's a whole different story. Okay, Putin did have an agenda. It was to go after Hillary Clinton after the Crimea situation and the Ukraine situation. This was his payback. He was very successful. He picked the right guy. to activate his payback, and he was absolutely successful. Do we have the right guy in charge? Absolutely not. When I think of a leader, when I think though we don't need one person, I do agree with Joe Rogan, but since we do have that system, when I think of a leader, he or she needs to be able to unify by any means necessary, even at a chance of failure. I don't think this is that person. As for as for being a strong leader, that's also debatable. Like I said, a few of the people that I've talked to, they tend to disagree, especially with his mismanagement of Taj Mahal and several other projects that have failed and everything like that. So I don't think he makes a good president, good leader. I do think I agree with Carter that he is an illegitimate president. And there's a lot of, I'm not a smart person, but there's a lot of smart people who also think the same way as well, who also think this was, whether colluded with Russia or not, it was definitely Russia's intent. And we could get into that hopefully at another time. And as for, socialism, like I said, in my opinion, whether you're a communist country or any other country or any other system, I believe all roads do ultimately lead to socialism, which is part community and government, part privatized system, coexisting together for the betterment of the country. And that's pretty much where I'll leave that aspect of it.
Perfect. Well, yeah, maybe we'll shoot for next time to do Russia, gun control, and global warming, and
I like it.
we'll start off with those. But yeah, thank you, Joe. I appreciate the call. I hope you have a great week, and we'll be talking again soon.
Thanks a lot, bud.
All right. Cheers.